All right.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. And today I have Rachelle Heinenman. Hi, Rachelle.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to be here.
It's so good to have you on. This has been like 2 years in coming, something like that.
Something like that. I'm glad we
Yeah.
could make it happen.
Yeah. So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. What do
Sure.
you do? Where do you live?
Sure. So I am a licensed mental health counselor. So I practice as a psychotherapist. I'm based in Brooklyn and New York City. I specialize in working with people struggling with eating disorders, disordered eating, um, depression, anxiety, and relationship stuff. So I would say a large part of my expertise is working with people who are struggling with anything related to food and exercise and body image.
Amazing. Did you know that you always wanted to do that?
I mean, I guess yes. I always knew I wanted to kind of focus on helping women, empowering women. I didn't know exactly what it would look like. I was totally not that kind of person who was like, I was going to be a therapist. And I graduated college without having any idea what I was going to do.
Wow.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah. So I definitely knew that I wanted to work with women, empowering women, and just like a little bit of background. So this eating stuff is like so prevalent in our community, in the world. At a certain point, it was kind of getting like boring. Like the only thing people would talk about is their weight and food.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm kind
Hmm.
of sick of this. I've done every diet with you and I'm really over it. We're in college already. And then once I went to grad school, I started understanding that eating disorders, but really just a relationship with food and exercise is so much deeper than it actually looks like on the surface. So, for example, if we're talking about restriction, that there's some sort of function that it plays. So
Hmm.
taking all the frustration that I felt in terms of the thin ideal and diet culture and channeling it with the knowledge that I learned in grad school and post-grad training to really empower women to kind of face their demons in a way, not kind of hide behind any sort of eating stuff or exercise stuff or really any other symptoms.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's, like for many of us that have been like in diet culture for so long, at a certain point we're just like, this can't be it. Like this just can't be it. So like when we're like faced with the opportunity to like teach other women, it's just like, how could we not?
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but at a certain point, if I was getting together with my friends, I didn't want to talk about the newest diet. It was so dumb already.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can we talk
Yeah,
about anything else?
right. It's true. I mean, it happens to me like I'm a dietitian, so like it's kind of like I kind of like hide almost like when people are like, "Oh, you're a dietitian," right? I'm like, "Oh no, oh no."
What do you think about this? Tell me about this diet.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
diet.
yeah. And it's really funny. Like, I never thought I would like care. Like, I never thought I would ever want to not talk about it or like even intuitive eating. But like that, I think, anyways, that's a totally different topic. But that really does come into like, about boundaries and like understanding our limits. Like, of course, you want to talk about the things that you're passionate about and that you love, but like, it does get it. Like, it's hard. Like, people ask you questions and they want to talk about it, and you're like, I don't. I heard Lori Gottlieb. She's an author. She wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And she
Yes.
said that when she's on a plane, like when people are like, "Oh, what do you do?" And she's like, "Well, I'm a therapist." They say like, "Oh, are you gonna like analyze me?" And she's like, "Well, if I was a gynecologist, would I like do would I do a test on you right now?" Like, and it's like it's really true. Like, I could
So
understand why somebody would think that about a therapist, but like people aren't just gonna like start working in the middle of like, the
exactly.
gym.
Yeah. My answer is usually I'm off the clock. I'm not getting paid for this. So if you're paying me, then absolutely I'll
Yeah.
analyze.
Yeah, I saw another like business consultant on Instagram like saying like, yeah, you could pick my brain if you pay me like $150 to do so. Like, I mean, I get it. Like, if you're not like in that like service-based industry, it's hard to understand that. But like, I'm just saying it so that people could understand it because it's like interesting that like people
Yeah.
don't realize that
Yeah.
that's
And to
like,
be fair, most people are just trying to make conversation,
yeah,
connect. So I get that.
Yeah, totally. So I could ask you like a million questions, but I know that we came up with a topic, which is new for me on this podcast because I always tell my guests like I could send you questions, but we could just talk because I just like to talk and hear your story. But we came up with a really cool topic, which I haven't really covered on my podcast, which is um, understanding the similarities and the differences between using, let's say, food to cope and money to cope or spending to cope or restricting food and restricting money. So could you talk to us a little bit about like what you think on that topic?
Sure. So, I mean, the reason why I thought it was so important to talk about was mainly in my work. I would notice that if working with people who are either struggling with some sort of eating disorder or disordered eating, and we would tackle the behaviors, they would be feeling fine, we would be working through things, and they would seem to be making progress. And then somehow something similar was happening with their relationship with money. And I started to realize that if we don't actually get to what's underneath the behaviors, we start to play a whack-a-mole game. So, okay,
Right.
so we kind of targeted this eating stuff, but it's coming out exactly the same in the money.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, or most often what comes up is the restrict, binge cycle or relationship to food and money.
Mm-hmm.
So in food, there's the restricting, which is just not having as much as your body needs or the type of food that you are craving. And the binging, and I'll just use that word loosely, but just kind of like eating emotionally a little too much when it's uncomfortable for your body. I want to like, I'm going to use this word also loosely, a little reckless. So if we kind of translate that into the money, there are some people or some circumstances that we kind of approach it as, I don't want to spend that kind of money. If you're maybe the Ebates Rakuten kind of person, I need to save like the 1%.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So the restrictor is the person who's the saver, the person who doesn't really want to spend the money, who, if they have to spend the money, they'll spend the least amount of money. If they need the thing, they'll try to convince themselves they don't need the thing. It's just this more restrictive mentality that they don't spend it, kind of holding on to their money. And then the opposite is true for the binger or the binge spender, is when they just kind of go shopping and spend who knows what without really thinking about it. Again, with the word reckless. So a lot of times we see both sides of it with one person, and sometimes we just see one. But somebody who struggles with, let's say, a restrictive mindset with their eating, even if they have trained themselves to eat more regularly and to honor their body, they might then kind of turn to money in that. I'll give you like a scenario. You walk into the grocery store and you see, I don't know, like your favorite ice cream or your favorite who knows what. But that product is $7 and like the generic brand is $3 and it's not as good, but you're like, I guess I'll get it because it's like actually half the price. So,
It sounds like me.
I mean, I do like a disclaimer. I think that budgeting is really important. Finances are something that's, tight. Obviously, we're not saying spend, spend, spend for someone who's a restrictor, but usually somebody who's that restrictor it doesn't really have to do with budgeting or
Right.
financial capability.
No, that's a really good point. And for the listeners, like I wasn't saying that like I am doing that. I was just saying that exactly what you were saying, that you that could be a normal behavior for some people.
Exactly. Yeah. And then let's say the same with the binging. I'm not even talking about like Confessions of a Shopaholic, where you spend thousands and thousands of dollars, which is definitely the case for some people. But sometimes you're like, I'm not gonna go out with my friends. I'm not going to buy this thing or go on this vacation or whatever it is. They kind of really pinch their pennies, and this is kind of the key, not in a deliberate way. They just kind of like are fed up and they're like, whatever, I'm just buying this. It's on sale and I want it. And so I'm just gonna get it. So kind of channeling, I guess, more of the reckless sort of binge side of it. That would be an example.
Okay, that's really interesting. So was this something that you were seeing like over and over and over again in your practice, or you just started, weaving together a theme throughout some clients?
So I would say not everyone, but a large portion of people. And usually I wasn't seeing it because they just weren't talking about it. Now that I know to look out for it, and I'll ask clients about it, they'll be like, actually, yes. And some of them are like, you're so annoying. Why do we have to?
Right. Why do you have to know like what I'm using to like cope with my life? Yeah. Seriously,
Exactly.
like you got rid of my food and now you're here to get rid of my money. I know. Totally. I totally get that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess, okay, what I want the listeners to hear is that, so this is like a personality type, right? This restrictive personality type, or it could be many things. We can't generalize. We can't generalize why people have this restrictive personality, but is there like a restrictive personality? There's usually some trauma involved. There's some deprivation. Like what are the common themes that you're seeing of this personality type?
Yes. So, I mean, some people who are either trained as financial therapists or people in that world will definitely have a much better understanding of the different personality types. It's not just the restrictor, the saver and the spender. There's the investor. There are other personality types, and a lot of times people can kind of fall in between. I hesitate to say it's a personality type because it's kind of like finite in a way or definite. This is who I am. I think that for certain people, they gravitate toward one way of coping. So the same way that one person might gravitate toward restriction in eating, and another person might gravitate toward more of an emotional eating or binging, the same is true. But I would hesitate to say like there's a specific personality that goes with each one.
But do you see like, are you seeing a common theme, like people, food insecurity, people who were put on diets as kids, or they didn't have their basics as kids?
Absolutely. I mean, the restrictive mentality definitely comes from the scarcity mentality. So there's, there's with the food, there is not going to be enough food. With the money, there's not going to be enough money. And, when we use the word trauma, it could be a small t trauma. It's not actually something that would be diagnosable, for lack of a better term, but the combination of experiences that somebody might have had in terms of money. So the way that their parents spent or didn't spend, the way that their community spent or didn't spend, the messages that they received about money, about items and materialism, and also how it's attached to your worth.
Right.
Like, oh, you spend this, you're so frivolous. Or you're saving, oh, we're going to kind of commend you on this. Or you're not spending, oh, that means you're kind of like a loser. We don't like you. So there's so many different associations that people have learned together with money or the lack thereof.
Yeah, and I will say that, like, we even know this from, like, let's say Holocaust survivors, like people who were brought up in homes with Holocaust survivor parents or even grandparents. There is that common mentality of no wasting food, but no wasting anything, money, like just really holding on to things, even, intergenerationally, which totally makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're not like blaming anyone.
Right. Of course not.
These things happening. It's just more of an understanding. How did this happen?
So what I think I know like what you're going to say, but I want to ask the question. So it actually makes perfect sense to me that if somebody is restricting and then binging with food, just from like my line of work and what I see, that, what I try to do with my clients is to help them have other healthier coping mechanisms. But that takes a long time to, really cultivate and really, integrate into your life. So I would totally see that could happen like easily, that a client is working on their relationship with food and then all of a sudden their money is out of whack. So how do you, if they don't bring it up, how do you work with them like that? Are you working on the whole picture of the restrictive behavior?
Absolutely. I think for some people that either hint to it, so they'll, for example, a client who's going out with her friends all the time, who's doing bottomless brunch. There's no way that they're spending, and bottomless brunch is like this.
Yeah, what is that?
It's you go to brunch on Sunday and it's basically you just drink it's bottomless. You just drink and drink and drink and drink and drink.
It's a buffet.
Not necessarily, but they act as it's like an all-you-can drink. It for lack of a better way to describe it, it's tremendously expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is doing that, or they're engaging in behaviors that I know are very expensive, or, you know, let's just use this example, I'll ask about it. Like, oh, you kind of were struggling to find a job, and how did you afford your meal? Or if they're going to a really fancy restaurant or something like that. So usually like subtle cues I'll pick up on them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if there are no cues, I'll just ask, like, what's your relationship like with money?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because usually there's something there.
It's really crazy what you're saying, because what I'm going to say, it sounds exactly like diet culture, but if like I read the Dave Ramsey Money Makeover book. Did you read that?
Yes. Well, I didn't read the book. I have listened to his podcast, and
oh yeah, he's great. I love the book. So, but I think I don't remember the statistic, but he said that like so many of Americans are in debt, and especially because we pay for college, you know, and we don't try to go to like cheaper colleges. We buy more expensive cars. So like that, I learned a lot from that book. Not that I was never a frivolous spender, and like for me, I'm probably I am on the restrictive spending side. So I don't know if I really needed that book, but it did help us a lot. And it's such a like fine line between being, you know, fiscally responsible and being very restrictive. So like with this person that you were saying that is eating at an expensive restaurant, but you can't hold down a job. I think I know so many people that just like swipe their credit card.
Yeah. And I think also that, let's just say if we're using Dave Ramsey, a lot of his clientele, I don't know for sure, but it sounds like they have a lot of credit card debt, which is
right.
The idea that you're going to use your card to spend money you don't actually have.
Which most people do. I have to say that. I think.
Yeah. Somebody who's in a restrictive mentality will probably be like, are you serious? You're going to spend money that you don't have, and then it'll be like, what, 14% interest?
So that's me. Exactly. Which is like, I don't know. Obviously there's like a balance, but like, that's where it's really hard to know. Are they being fiscally responsible, or are they restricting? It's hard to know.
It is hard. And something maybe to help you understand it a little bit more on your turf, if somebody comes to you and says, how do I understand the fine line between, you know, what's healthy for me psychologically, emotionally, and physically, and what's restrictive? It's so subjective. To one person,
yes,
what sounds really restrictive is, maybe not that it's not as restrictive as we think, but it's all just subjective. And so we have to tease out, for this specific person with their finances, what is actually fiscally responsible and what is restrictive and what is too reckless.
Right. So in that situation, there is some sort of like calculating and getting in touch with reality. Like, what is the reality?
Absolutely. Right? Which is where people who don't have any idea of where they stand, it's really important to start budgeting, to actually look at your finances, which I understand is a can of worms for some people, because there's so much financial anxiety. Like, I'm not even going to look at my bank account. Let my husband deal with it. I don't want to.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, there are people who don't want to have the conversation. It stresses them out. And you can tell when you're looking at someone and you're saying, well, what's your finances like? Or do you have a budget? And they start getting antsy and frantic. Like, they can't even have the conversation. The question
I have to say, just personally, I have a ton of financial anxiety, and there's, part of my personality, part of whatever, but like, I could totally relate to that. So I'm really, who's ever listening, I could really relate. Like, I understand I even have to ask myself, like, am I being fiscally responsible, or am I not? Where, like you said, we have to look at an individual person. Like, are you meeting your basic needs? Obviously there's a problem there if you're not.
Exactly.
Spend money.
But thinking about it, for your area of expertise, if you think about, let's say, in terms of food, there's so much anxiety when we don't understand anything about our relationship with food. If we have no understanding of what intuitive eating is, or what anything related to disordered eating is. And once you learn that, then it becomes a lot more structured, and you can understand, okay, this falls into the framework of something that potentially is a little bit more restrictive or unhealthy for me. So I'd say, you know, the very first thing is to just gather information, like the Dave Ramsey book, if that speaks to you. There are so many different resources to learn how, and I would highly encourage people to meet with a financial advisor, just to kind of look at their own finances and see where they actually stand.
I actually have a great financial advisor if anyone wants to reach out to me. And I was, I get like, I'm like so activated when it comes to money, honestly. I'm just being honest. So like when you said that like people, they say like, I can't even look at my bank account, like that is so like I feel that. Like I physically feel that, because it's a crazy thing. Like I think that, you know, if let's say we could parallel it with food, I'm thinking of like, you know, I'm not even thinking about clients. I'm thinking about people saying like, I'm just going to eat this slice of pizza, and like, I'm not even going to like look at the calories. Like I'm talking about like in really steeped in diet culture, but let's say that could come up all the time, right? Where you're just like, something's making you feel really, really anxious. You could educate yourself, you could assess, but because you have this anxiety around it, you just shy away from it. And so what I see that all the time is that like we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like if you have financial anxiety, or you have anxiety around your body, and it's so hard, like it's so hard to talk about, it's so hard to bring it up, but like you won't be able to move past it unless you do bring it up and feel uncomfortable and get skills to deal with that discomfort, right?
Exactly. I will say, talking on the other side, there's a certain amount of financial anxiety and certain personality that would overconsume. So they would listen to tons of podcasts and read every book out there.
Yeah.
And that's easing their financial anxiety. And at a certain point, you have to stop listening and stop reading and just jump into it and do it. And that sometimes is the scariest part.
Yeah, and sometimes that's the part where you're just like, how would you even know that you've gone there, because you're so knee deep in it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's kind of where the therapist would come in and be like, okay, like I know that you wanted to be like responsible and do your research, but like now it's taking over your life. So time to just start. Like the same thing with, let's say the same thing with food. Like, how is it affecting your life? Like, how is this decision to start implementing joyful movement, let's say, or start implementing gentle nutrition, but now you're consumed with reading about the latest nutrition. So have you gone overboard, right? There's just always assessing how it's affecting your daily living.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that usually the marker for when something is something that we need to work on is when it interferes with your quality of life.
Right. It's so interesting. So interesting. So I don't want to keep you too late, but is there anything else that you see, like anything else you want to leave the listeners with, or any other like helpful tip that you could give to somebody who's really struggling with this restrictive?
Yeah, well, I will say just another point before that we also have to look at the people who are coming at it from the other perspective. So people who are spending and don't necessarily have the money for the amount of spending that they're doing. And obviously each person is different because everyone has their own financial situation. But if, let's say, someone is making X and they're spending X plus Y, that's a problem. So I just do want to talk to that sort of person, that it's coming, like the same as restrict and binging for food is coming from two sides of the same coin. It's manifesting itself differently, but it's definitely just as much of an issue. And we just have to understand how these behaviors and ways of interacting is functional in order to get past it.
So what do you mean by that? For people who wouldn't understand what that means?
Well, I would say, let's just say there's somebody who spends a lot of money on other people and they don't necessarily have it. So they go out to eat and they're like, it's okay, I got it.
Right.
It's all on me, but they went out to eat and it's not cheap. And they have 4 friends with them.
Right.
So part of the question is, well, what are you hoping for when you spend the money on all your friends? And sometimes it could be, I just want to be accepted. I want to be loved. And it's very hard for this particular person to, understand a world in which they can be accepted and loved without spending. And so part of what's really scary is taking off those training wheels of what they're hiding behind the money and saying, well, these are your friends, and let's see if they'll accept you and love you if you don't have that sort of taking care of them with your money.
Right.
That's just one small example of what might potentially be underneath.
Right. So the same thing with food. Like if somebody's constantly like binging, and we could start to, like I do sometimes have people track it, like, and we start to notice like you're always binging when your mom's around, or you're always binging when you have a test coming up, right? So we're gonna have data points of what's triggering. And yes, it's functional. It's helping you procrastinate, it's helping you numb, it's helping you with a lot of other things. So you're saying make sense of the behavior first.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would suggest something similar to what you just said. So if somebody's really struggling with it, I love journaling. I think it's a really great way for our mind to just wander and kind of go wherever it needs to go, to just write things down. So first of all, we can get a couple of, like you said, data points as to when does this happen? Was something going on before? Is something potentially going to go on after? Who were the people that I was relating to in these situations? What was I feeling? So all those data points are really important. And I think the next part of it is really understanding the associations that we have to a certain type of spender or item.
Mhm.
Like, for example, if I say, I really want this bag, well, what will I be? Or what sort of adjective can I ascribe to myself if I go around wearing this bag? Or if I, don't spend this money in wherever it is, if I withhold and I hold myself back, how will I feel? Will I feel proud, smug, superior, empowered? What will I feel? And those are the things we're actually trying to get at. So if we understand that we're trying to do this in a way to feel empowered, well, then how can we actually do that in a way that's healthier or more
That's
fun?
actually empowering, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I will say, sorry, what did you say?
Exactly the same process for food.
Right. Yes, 100%. And I hope that people will really take this advice and use it with themselves. Um, another thing that stuck out to me was that when you said like, if you're making X and you're spending X plus Y, there's such a range of like what's considered healthy eating, healthy spending, because some people will say like, I know people like this that like their paycheck goes straight into the bank, and like 10% is taken off for Meister, and 10% is taken off for savings, and 10%, and that's beautiful. I don't think that person has financial anxiety around that. That gives them a sense of calm. And some people will not be doing that. They don't feel like they need to pay Meister because they asked their Rav and they just can't, whatever. And then there's other people who are going to be spending, let's say, I wouldn't even say frivolously, they could afford it.
Mhm.
So that month they're not going to save. Like that's like to each their own.
Exactly. And that's no problem. And especially if it's not affecting your life in a negative way.
Right.
I don't want to pathologize anything like that.
Right. Right. Exactly. So just that there's like under this category of overspending, underspending, overeating, undereating, there's a huge umbrella range and individual person's life that we have to take into consideration.
Absolutely. That's very true.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us. Where could the listeners find you?
Yeah. So my website is under construction, but I'm R Heinenman Therapy. I think my website is just going to be my name in a couple months. It's coming up. So on my website, on Instagram, so I'm at R Heinenman. And that's where you can find me.
Okay, great. And I'll put all your info in the show notes, and I'll lead everyone who reaches out directly to you.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure.